Welcome to the Rethinking podcast, Finding Truth Beyond the Rhetoric. I'm Dan, here with my friend, longtime friend Brad, with whom I often study and talk politics. And we've been looking at politics lately. This is in the middle of COVID-19, turned into the protests over George Floyd's death that have rioting and looting in them as well. And it's let's say that political life is at a pretty complicated time right now. And there's a lot to think about, a lot to consider. And we're trying to get beyond the rhetoric, as our name implies, and try and consider really what the issues are, how you can think about them a little clearer, how you can rethink some of them so that you can see the issues in a wider way and consider some things you probably haven't considered before, and to really apply some precise thinking to some of the issues, and so that you can find specific solutions and understand how these would really make things better and not just be more talking points by another politician.
So what we want to talk about today is police authority. And I think you'll agree with me that, first of all, we were even hesitant to talk about this because there's so much, there's so much political baggage attached to it. I've seen that as I talk with friends, I go to work, and everyone has an opinion, of one sort or another. Everyone's got strong feelings about it. But I've noticed, and it's interesting that, there are some ideas that are floating around out there, like defund the police. There are legitimate reforms out there, and I support looking at reforms. But I noticed that a lot of people, as they look at it, they're unhappy, but they're also not really sure where they're at. Heard people say things like, I definitely stand for this, but I don't know about that, et cetera, et cetera.
Yeah,
and
it's precisely what I've been seeing. People feel obligated at this time to say something. I've seen people make political comments on social media. Friends of mine, people I've known my entire life, who have never said a word on the subject until this moment.
It's interesting, isn't it?
It is, yeah. It's strange. People are more emotionally involved and connected to politics, and particularly to the issue of policing, than I think they've ever been.
The thing that makes me really want to talk about this with you is that despite the fact that literally everyone under the sun is talking about this, I still have yet to see a really good look at what the police's function is and why they're there, and the basis of their authority, and what that means for not just George Floyd, but for so many others, and for all the reforms they're proposing. It seems like so many people are proposing reforms because they sound good and not because they're actually based on something.
Right.
And I think that's the issue.
Yeah, and I've seen there's a somewhat famous list going around. Is it 70 things, 75 things? If you've got a list of 75 things that you think should be done, those aren't goals, and those aren't reforms. That's like a wish list.
Yeah.
You need something more specific than that, much more specific than that, if you want to make changes. And so, as we consider this, we want to propose some changes, some things to consider, some things that we think are major issues that we want to draw attention to, that have been there for quite some time, and that would make a real difference in this. So many people are willing to say, like, maybe we should defund the police. They're at the point where they're considering even the existence of it. And I don't know how large that group actually is, but the fact that it's there, and that for some people it's a serious question on the table, suggests to me that it's the perfect time to really consider this from the ground up, to consider the policing at a basic level, to strip away the myriad things that go into it, the 1,000 things that police officers do, and view it perhaps in a way that many people have never thought of it. But what is society like without it, or prior to police? And then what is that role that the police fill in a very basic sense, in a basic way? What is it that they have authority, or should have authority, to do naturally? and reconsider it from there. Because it's very clear that things like what happened to George Floyd should not happen, should never happen, if at all possible. I mean, you can't completely eliminate all mistakes, but certainly we can do better than we have been. And with so many people interested in doing better, this is the perfect time to actually seriously consider ways that we can do it, and we can consider it from the ground up.
So let's do that. Let's walk it back. So you know me, I'm an extremist. Like to take things to their very extreme when it comes to ideas, anyways.
Yeah, it's really a useful tool in logic if you can to carry an idea to its extreme and see how it works.
So let's carry an idea to an extreme. Let's say that you strip away not just the police, but everything else, and you just leave me. You strip away society, infrastructure, and you just have me providing for myself, alone in a state of nature, right? As the political philosophers like to say. So it's just me. I'm hunting, I'm gathering, I'm collecting resources in order to survive, right?
Right.
There's obviously no need for a police force, and a police force makes no sense because it's just me. Now,
you'd make a great police force, to be fair. I'm not even there. I can't really say anything about it. But
Exactly. I am the ultimate police force because I police myself most of the time.
Most of the time. Fair enough.
Inflicted injuries I would, of course, have to police myself for. Anyways.
Oh, caught me taking a drink. I about spewed it into my microphone.
That's really my goal with this podcast. so succeeded. Anyways, so obviously, you introduce, you. Now here comes Dan King, who moves in next door out of nowhere, which is strange because he knows I don't like him.
Yeah, likely I'm foraging in the same place, or maybe growing some crops somewhere where we might encounter each other. Fair enough.
We've reached a point where there can be trade, but there can also be conflict, because I can go over and I can steal your berries because, honestly, a stolen berry just tastes better to me than a foraged berry. So I can steal your berries, and you could try and steal mine, and you can also try and defend yourself from me. I come to steal your berries, and you slap my hand away with a stick, right? And that would be the first instance of self-defense in this our little hypothetical world, right?
Right.
It's very
with
simple.
human interaction. Of course, there may be animals or whatever. Yeah. Human interaction. This is self-defense. Yeah.
Self-defense of a pack of deer against a coyote, even though they have it. That's neither here nor there. I told you I like extremes, but not that extreme.
we're not.
So dial it back.
Fair enough. So by self-defense here, you mean, what we would normally refer to in communities as self-defense. You're protecting yourself from another person.
Exactly. And the important thing here is that no one had to authorize you or give you permission to defend yourself, right?
Right.
It's what we would say natural or God-given, depending on your beliefs, but definitely a natural law that you have the right to protect yourself.
Yeah. Yeah, it'd be silly to look for justification at that point. There'd be no one to even talk to about it. You're just protecting your own.
Protecting your own. It's very basic, a very basic idea, because it's a very basic world that we've created here. But then we introduce a third person, and then maybe a fourth or a fifth, until we've got 10 people now who are foraging, maybe even farming a little in this area, right? And
much more complex interactions at that point, and especially if you add families into this. And
Exactly. And maybe you start even reaching a point of specialization, right? Where you're fantastic at picking berries, and I'm a fantastic fisherman, so I trade some of my fish for your berries so that I can focus just on fishing and you can focus on, gathering berries.
Right, and it begins to look like
down the line with person 3, 4, or 5.
Yeah, so at that point we have a market, a developing economy per se, so that people are acting in distinct ways. We're no longer all doing the same exact things just for ourselves, and we now are interacting regularly, which is probably going to increase significantly maybe the friction in some sense. I don't know. It'll certainly increase. There are a lot of benefits to interacting, but it's one thing to watch my back against one person, and it's another thing to watch my back against 10 people. And we're going to steal someone's berries that are probably in their hand going into their mouth, right? If you're living hand to mouth in a very simple, you're living alone on an island or whatever, the temptation to theft just isn't all that great. But if you've got a more developed economy, you've got something more complex, you've got you're starting to get maybe not luxury, but certainly things that are going to be useful tomorrow and the next day, and not just consumed immediately. Then yes, you're gonna have. There's going to be much more benefit to trying to steal some of those things.
Yeah, and there'll also be much more emotional reasons to commit crimes as well. There'll be that root thing you said to me at dinner last night. Exactly, as these relationships form. And so that's going to change everything. And then as this community grows, we're going to reach a point, because even with 10 people,
if they're spread out,
I'd feel like I could defend myself. Like, I don't see any need to specialize there, right? I can take care of myself. But as our society grows, and maybe we even have a few different communities, of 20 or 30 people, and some of these communities, individuals are starting to try and steal on a regular basis. And
or you get a group that comes in from outside or whatever, and and there start to be maybe roaming bandits, and I pose the idea. I say, hey, I don't know about you guys, but I have these dried fish that I store at my home that have been stolen 2 or 3 times now, and I can't stay at home to defend these dried fish. I have to go get the fish. I can't do both. Right.
And I know the same is true with most of you. So why don't we choose Gary here, who is strong, and he's honest, and we all trust him. And instead of Gary doing what he normally did, we're going to all pay him, basically, through our barter and trade, to protect all of our resources. So that when we go out, he will patrol our area and make sure that no one steals, that no one murders, that no one commits any violence towards any other person, right? Because in this state of nature, that's really all that we have a right to, is ourselves and our possessions, right? And so that's obviously what we care about and what we would want him to protect.
Right. So now he's got
person to protect us.
Yeah, and we use the word sheriff, and you probably imagine a shiny badge and a handgun or whatever, and he's the authority figure in quotes. But the authority that he holds is not any particular authority that's unique to him. He's just helping to defend you, which you could already do, and defend somebody else, which they could already do, and defend somebody else, which they could already do. There's no his authority hasn't increased per se. His powers haven't increased. He's merely protecting the things that we could already protect. And in a point to your description of when it would be worth getting a sheriff, when it would be worth hiring someone to take on this duty in a full-time or part-time capacity, it makes a lot of sense. If you're losing goods on a regular basis that you've invested a lot of time and work into, like you mentioned, the dried fish. The fish don't dry themselves. They don't catch themselves. They don't dry themselves. They don't store themselves. When that starts to happen from time to time, it begins to be worth more for you to pay a small amount to a sheriff than it would be for you not to. You're losing so much that you actually make money per se. You actually become wealthier by paying this person to take on the duties of policing.
Yeah. Otherwise, why would I do it?
Otherwise, why would
why would I hire this man to protect us if I only have a handful of fishes stolen every other month, and that's it? No other violence is perpetrated against me. No one tries to attack me.
Yeah, there's no real risks to you or losses. Yeah,
exactly. Or if nothing was being stolen, where would be my reason? You know what I mean?
Right,
which is how it was in that smaller community. There was no incentive. And so obviously there was no, like you said, there was no sheriff. Even though he wouldn't have had that title, there was no sheriff because there was no need.
There was no need, yeah. It wouldn't be, you would end up losing so much more in terms of your goods and labor, the things you've invested your time and effort into, by paying a sheriff than you would by not. And so it makes sense that at some point it's going to become cost effective, per se, to hire a sheriff. And at that point, reasonable people will band together and say, look, we need somebody full-time or maybe even part-time wandering around, keeping an eye on things and backing us up when we get attacked or when we have a problem, or trying to track down these people or keep them out of our community, or however he decides to go about it. But at some point, that's going to become more effective.
Yeah, exactly. And then you take that argument further, where you say, hey, we have some new weapons technologies. There are spears and rocks and slings that take time and practice to be good at. And we don't have that time. So even if we get attacked, we can't defend ourselves well, versus, this man that we've chosen, if he can spend, the majority of his day split between guarding us and training to become better, then he is even more effective. And then as our community gets larger, it can be multiple people, and it can become something larger, but at the same time is still operating under those exact same principles.
Right.
That he is simply exercising our own power of self-defense.
And it makes sense that people are extraordinarily upset with the police right now, and that they're, because there are some legitimate grievances against them, and obviously with this major event happening, but it's also in what they're looking at is they're looking at this and they're saying, wait a second, we want to defund the police, because what if paying the police officers isn't making us better off? What if it's a net loss? What if it's all, in some cases people will say the police are doing all bad. I don't think that's the case at all, but even if they don't have to be doing all bad for you to want to defund them, you could, if you come to the point where you think you're actually losing more in terms of the things that are important to you, whether it be happiness or wealth or however the things that you care about, than you are gaining, then the role of the police becomes a serious question. And that's why this way of thinking about it is so useful, because we want to get back to the point where everybody can look at this. We want to make the reforms and the changes or whatever it may take necessary so that people can look back at this and feel like having the police is a net gain. Feel like having the police, it makes them better off, and that it's a decision that makes sense because it's going to result in better lives. And that's what this point we're talking about is, this point where it would make sense for you not to have a sheriff, and then you get to the point where it would make sense for you to have one. And if we can figure out why that makes sense, it can give us some really interesting insights into what the role of the police should be, in what things everyone would agree the police can and should be doing, and thereby have the authority to do, and what they don't have the authority to do, or what many people would say is too far.
I really like that. I think there's power in looking at it that way and thinking, everyone does things because we expect benefit, right? We work so that we can get a paycheck. We obey traffic laws so that we don't get a citation. There's a clear cause and effect where we're making choices that we think will benefit us in every aspect of our lives. And the choice for a police force, the training for a police force, the very laws themselves that govern the police forces should be a part of that.
Yeah.
That we should be considering what benefits us.
Yeah. And when you think of it in these terms, it makes a lot of other ways of thinking about the police seem very odd. Like if you're thinking about it in this terms of like, I've got these things that I want to do for myself, and when I get to a point where I just can't do them, it's no longer effective for me to do them. I'm better off specializing in something else, and my life will be better by doing that. than by having to constantly watch my own back and do all these things, then that makes police authority and the basis of their authority a very different thing than if we say the police have the authority because it's a top-down thing, right? Because their authority doesn't come from the people. Their authority doesn't come from the commoners that they're policing. The police are somehow something extra special. They're something above the average citizen. When they're not, in fact. They're merely specialists in some sense in protecting the people and what they in ways that they already could anyway. I don't think I said that very clearly, but I always think of the concept of authority with police. People are always saying things like, well, police have the authority to do this, and you don't have the authority to do that. And I think that way of thinking about the police is a very bad way to think about it, because authority suggests permission. And when you think of it from a moral standpoint, we've been talking about it kind of in an economic perspective and what's good for you in terms of what you want to do with your life, whether that be economic goods that are hard goods like stuff, wealth, or even in terms of happiness and how you want to spend your time. But if you think of it in terms of what's moral and what would be moral to do, like everyone agrees that killing George Floyd was immoral. That was absolutely immoral. It was an unjust act. And whether you're a member of the police or not does not change whether his death was justified. It just doesn't. I don't think morals work that way. I don't think ethics works that way. If I'm a average citizen and I've killed someone, or I'm a police officer and I've killed someone, either it's right or wrong, and whether we're a police officer or an average citizen isn't an important factor that weighs into whether that person deserved to die or not. It's just not a critical factor. And that's why we've put it in the terms that we have, because I think it's a much clearer way of thinking about it than the normal distinctions we make between ordinary citizens and police officers.
Well, and it's interesting. It's interesting that you bring that up, because when you look at a lot of these police cases, though, that's not these cases of police incidents. Usually, these fatal shootings that have occurred, these police shootings. And that's not how they go down. They don't go down. The police are not held to the same standard that everyone else is currently. The way the system is set up now is not that way. That in order for a police officer to be charged with murder, it's not the same criteria that an individual citizen has to meet in order to get charged with that.
Right.
So clearly we're not living under that now.
Right. The ideas that we're discussing are certainly not the ones that are driving justice in cases where police officers are in the wrong.
And so that brings us to point A to point B. That there's a just way to police, and then there's the way that it's currently being done, and they're two very different things.
Yeah.
Because the way I look at it,
go ahead.
The way I look at it is that if I was an ordinary citizen and I was there when George Floyd was being killed, I would have had a right to pull out a gun and tell that officer to stand down or be shot. Right? Yeah. I believe that because that's, as we talked about before, you don't need a permission slip to defend someone else's rights, right?
Right. No.
And so
this whole thing comes from the ground up. It's not a top-down thing. It's not. You don't have authority to protect someone. You don't need someone's permission to do something good. It's just not the way it works.
But if I had done that, number one, I would have been shot. Number two, if I had survived,
for the record, this is all a theoretical exercise, right? We're not making any recommendations here. We're trying to think about this clearly.
Scenarios, to prove a point, right?
But you're right. Morally, you certainly had the authority to stop someone from being killed, like unjustly. Obviously, you have the moral authority to do that. You don't need a permission slip for that. Keep going.
Yeah. So first of all, I'd be shot. If I survived, I would be charged with assault. And so what
and
that means,
not just assault against a police officer, which is a different charge.
A different crime.
It is a different crime.
Absolutely.
It's a worse crime.
Absolutely. Yeah, it's a stiffer charge. And that's interesting because what that means is that we literally live in a world today where we do not have the right for self-defense. Let me give you another example. No-knock raids. No-knock raids have been around for a while, and the idea is that you don't give criminals a chance to dispose of illegal things, usually drugs or paraphernalia.
Right.
You don't give them a chance to escape, and you do that by not knocking, not announcing the police presence until you've entered the residence, and you just break in and arrest them.
Yeah, the goal of a no-knock raid makes a lot of sense. You're trying to catch them with their pants down. You're trying to catch them before they've destroyed the evidence, as you said, and gotten everything ready.
And so whether or not that's a practical idea for the police to do is not why I brought it up. The thing that's interesting about it is that there are cases where individuals do not know that it is the police when they break in, right?
Right.
For example, let me give you an example. There was a man named Tracy Engel who was in Arkansas. There was a no-knock warrant. The police break in, and by the way, it must have been the wrong house or something because there were no drugs on the premises. The thing they were searching for wasn't even there. But the police break in. Tracy has no idea who they are, why they. We're talking a matter of seconds, right?
Right.
As people break into your home, he holds up a gun that is completely broken, just trying to threaten away whoever's broken in, and gets shot several times by the police without him firing a shot because the gun's not even functional. So he survives, fortunately. He is in the ICU for several weeks. As soon as he's cleared from the ICU, he's immediately arrested and charged with aggravated assault against the police officers. And it's so interesting because it's so clear looking at this case that this man who shouldn't have had his home broken into in the first place doesn't have a right to self-defense if it's the police he's defending against.
Yeah.
Whether or not the police were in the right to break in doesn't even matter. All that matters is that he stood up to the police, and so he gets shut down, both physically and legally afterwards.
Yeah, and it's examples like that are so frustrating, and a lot of people don't hear about. You're hearing more about no-knock raids right now in the news, rightfully so. No-knock raids more so than perhaps any other common practice ends up putting police officers and innocent citizens in situations like that, where either the life of the citizen or the life of the police officer is going to be threatened or in jeopardy.
And like I said, I'm not trying to argue for or against no-knock raids. The fact of the matter, though, is that if, let's say, that no-knock raids were justified, then if the police made a mistake or failed to announce themselves properly, then shouldn't the citizen who's just trying to defend himself have that right?
Yeah. Yeah. And how do you...
And it's become pretty clear that they don't.
They don't. And the worst part is that even if you go through the process, you get arrested, no resistance, no anything like that, you get arrested. This is where a topic comes into play. As we're getting kind of into the practical things, make a few policy suggestions, and one of the big ones is going to be about qualified immunity, because even if they go to the wrong house and they kick in your door, and it just shatters into a million pieces, and then they realize that they're at the wrong place, you can do nothing to get them to repay you on that door. That door might as well have been shattered by a tornado, except for maybe your insurance covers tornadoes. Your insurance probably doesn't cover police kicking in.
Break-ins. Yep.
Right. And this is known as qualified immunity, but it's the idea that police officers. So if a police officers commit something that could be construed as a crime, you have no real way to initiate that process. That's entirely in the court of the district attorney. The district attorneys are the ones who prosecute crimes. And the district attorneys, unfortunately, are often very close to the police because they're often working with them to prosecute crimes. Obviously, they're
And
always closely tied together.
Not only do they work closely with the police, but the police themselves are the ones responsible for collecting the evidence the district attorney then uses to prosecute said crimes.
Right. It's somewhat indirect, but the district attorney actually issues orders the police have to fulfill. And so it is a strange relationship. And it's a relationship that we should probably discuss probably at length another time. But what I want to point out there is that the Supreme Court has decided that as long as the police officers are doing something in carrying out the law, something reasonable, there's a few words that you can attach to it, but ultimately it's going to be that can maybe limit it to a degree. But as long as they're doing something in line with the law, they are immune to civil suits. Now, civil suits are the things that a citizen can actually initiate, right? If someone does something to you, you can try and sue them. And people may sue for a lot of strange reasons these days, but there are a lot of good reasons why you might, if the police happen to break into your house,
yeah,
and it's
no
the
knock
wrong
rate is
house,
a great example of that.
Right, and they happen to break into your house, destroy a lot of stuff, and often you hear stories in these about they'll shoot the dog or whatever in the process. Rightfully so, because the dog could be a threat to them if they're going to be invading this house. And then it turns out it's the wrong house.
Well, rightfully so, assuming that it was a justified raid.
Assuming that it was a justified raid, correct. We're talking, in our example, they're not even at the right house, so it's obviously it's unjustified.
So there's nothing right about them shooting anything.
Right, and yet you have no civil recourse to this. So it's just an innocent mistake, an honest mistake in carrying out their duty. These kind of mistakes happen. Sorry. And it's this kind of qualified immunity that we see. Qualified immunity doesn't quite cover this, but it's also related to this whole idea of how we treat cops differently than ordinary citizens. They get a pass on some things that ordinary people do not. And you see that with like right now with the George Floyd case, it looks like we're going to get justice here. There's going to be prosecutions. They're going to try him if they can manage to put together sufficient evidence to make it worth trying on second-degree murder. And rightfully so, if assuming they can find the evidence for that. They should at least be third-degree murder, if not second. But after it happened, there was 3 days before they arrested him. And how could there be 3 days? like that 3-day period? No one else would get that. A police officer may get that in some cases, but an ordinary person involved closely in the death of someone
never would have left the scene if there were police officers already there, which there were.
Which there obviously were. Yeah, they're not going to leave the scene, let alone be able to go and spend 3 days. And it appears that in a lot of these cases with the police, to get the prosecuting attorney to actually prosecute, you almost need a public show. You almost need protests. Mm-hmm. You almost need some kind of social pressure to get the process started. Otherwise, so often it's just kind of assumed that it was a mistake and that they had to do it.
Well, and that's kind of the concern, which I think is getting into the area, the first area of reform that we're talking about here, which is there's not a lot of external control. You talked about how, in terms of suing, as long as they were honest, right? As long as they were sincerely trying to do their job, they basically are immune. I mean, there are a lot of caveats and there's lots of technicalities. But that's the gist of it.
Right. If you can't show that they're grossly violating their...
And a lot of people would say, okay, well, that makes sense. But let's think about a corporation. Let's say a corporation makes an energy drink. And they make a mistake, and that energy drink is lethal. And it kills 100 people, right? No, this is my hypothetical, right?
No, it's a good point. I'm just laughing.
And this happens all the time. This happens all the time with drug companies, right? They tried to do their best, and they made a mistake. And if the government finds out that they didn't make a mistake, but that they actually hid the fact that they knew that it would kill people, then they're going to face criminal charges. But if they can prove that they didn't know, then they may not get the criminal charges, but they are going to get their pants sued off by all those who were hurt, right?
Right.
The fact that they didn't mean to is not a defense, because those people are dead or maimed or whatever, and that's real. That happened.
Right.
That's
You're responsible for the
that
consequences, regardless of your intentions. Yeah.
Exactly.
Your intentions may elevate it to criminal, as you suggested, but it's not going to reduce it to nothing.
Exactly. I mean, that's literally what manslaughter as a legal term is there for. If you kill someone on accident, you still killed them.
Yeah, and there's still repercussions. Mm-hmm.
Exactly.
Rightfully so. Rightfully so. Unless they can show that as long as your negligence is involved, then yes, you bear some responsibility for it. That's implied by negligence.
Yeah, exactly. And that goes back to our more primitive example of defending life and liberty, that on our natural state of nature, that if I hurt you or damage you through my negligence, there's recompense to be had, regardless of who I am. And so I was going to take that example with the corporation farther. Let's say that, because right now there are governing bodies. There's the FDA that looks over these food companies, these drug companies, and, this energy drink company. Let's say that this energy drink company, their board members also happen to be, they work two jobs, and they work for the energy drink company, and they also work for the FDA.
Right.
And they're the ones regulating the energy drink company and investigating. But if you heard that was happening, you'd be like, okay, something's fishy going on here, and they're definitely protecting their interests. Right? And that's the same thing you have with the police, with the district attorneys. They are all on the same side, and they're working together. They're a team. That's their job. That's what their job's supposed to be.
Yeah, and they're not even necessarily a team to screw you over, per se. We're not suggesting bad motive on these people at all. We're just suggesting that the proximity, the connections, give them incentives that blur the lines. Just like you wouldn't report on your friends or on your work associates, or would be less likely to if you're regularly working with them. You'd be less likely in this case.
Yeah, and let me give you an example. In 2005, there was something called the Danziger Bridge shootings. It was right after Hurricane Katrina, when some police officers responded to a call that officers were being shot at. Right, so this is a high energy, high intensity situation.
Yeah, once bullets are fired, it's freaky.
And the police show up. They see people crossing the bridge, and they open fire on them. These people happen to be passersby. Unarmed passersby.
Oh, jeez.
And the police officers, claim that they were being fired at, obviously not by these individuals. And two of those individuals end up dying, and several of them end up being injured. Right. So obviously, first of all, I don't think those officers, and it seems pretty clear, those officers did not intend to do that. Those officers were trying to protect their fellow officers, and they made a mistake, and that's the reality of what happened. So when the police conduct their investigation, and very early on they decide to misrepresent what happened, and in fact, not only the officers there, but one of the officers in that same department who was sent to collect evidence and investigate actually instructed them on what to say and what to do in order to change the evidence so that it looked like a justified shooting. And you can see why they would do that, because these people are already dead, but now these police officers could lose their jobs, they could go to prison, and they're thinking, hey, we're just trying to protect people, right? And it makes sense. It makes sense why this happened. Because this officer's trying to look out for his fellow officers. They're just trying to make it through the day. And so it makes sense for them to do this because, once again, where's that oversight?
Yeah.
And it's only later on when there's a federal investigation that comes in and sees their sloppy work and notices the discrepancies, that they come out and say, hey, hold on, this doesn't add up, dig more and find out the truth of what happened. But the fact that that happened is evidence of the fact that their incentives are so skewed to protect each other.
And it makes, like you said, it makes so much sense. Like in that circumstance, you've just accidentally shot some people. You were trying to do the right thing. We can put the best of intentions on these people. And you're the guy who comes there. You're looking at the evidence. You realize that this doesn't look good. Everyone's freaked out. And in the moment you think, man, I mean, maybe what if they get accused of murder? Like, what if they don't believe that they were trying, that they don't believe in the good intentions of these cops. Like, this could go bad so quickly. I know these guys. I know they're good cops. I know they didn't mean to do this. But will a jury? I don't know. And making the call to be like, it's going to be better for everybody if the evidence tells a slightly different story. And that, the fact that I can, like, you can just see how that came about. And seeing that is a perfect example, because when you realize that with the best of intentions in the world, their incentives may align to lying to the public to cover for people that they know are good people, per se. You just know that this is happening far more times than it's being caught.
And I want to follow it up with one more thought, though, because that's an extreme scenario where you have corruption, right, on a fundamental level. But as someone, I work in a warehouse and I'm a manager, right? And so I'm responsible for discipline. And there are a set of rules that I have to enforce, right?
Yeah.
And I know for a fact that it is impossible to enforce those rules perfectly. And I think you can talk to any manager, you can talk to any police officer, anyone who enforces rules, and they will tell you the same thing, that you cannot enforce it perfectly, which means that it comes down to your discretion, right?
Right.
So cut for me as a manager now to a district attorney, and he is prosecuting, hardened criminals a certain way, and then he's now supposed to prosecute police officers, not just police officers, but police officers that his department has worked with on a regular basis to convict these hardened criminals.
Yeah.
Now, you don't need corruption for that district attorney and his entire department to behave differently towards the police than he does towards a citizen, right? That's not corruption. That's not anyone doing anything strictly unethical. That's just human nature.
Yeah.
Just like I have a hard time not treating my best performers who are always there on time, who do what needs to be done. It's hard not to treat them differently when they make a mistake versus the guy who's always causing problems makes a mistake, and how I respond to that.
Yeah.
It's hard. It's hard not to do that, and I can see that happening.
Yeah. Yeah, and sometimes just bad things happen. and you're more willing to believe that when it's someone that you know well, and you think that they're a good person, or that they've worked hard, like you said.
You give them the benefit of the doubt than the repeat offender.
Right, and it's not only is it more tempting to, it's almost unavoidable that you do, whether you intend to or not, whether you consciously note it or not. Yeah. Yeah, and that's one of these things where you think that maybe there's something systemic that could change, right? You're not saying per se that there's some big conspiracy. It's just that human nature is such that these circumstances are going to lead to a degree of leniency that perhaps is going to be a little more biased than we would like, and that over the course of many cases that's going to have an impact on how people perceive the police, and how people get to the point now where they feel very strongly that the police are being treated by a different standard than they are.
And like you said before, with the qualified immunity, it's not just feelings that we're talking about. We're talking about the law of the land. The police are prosecuted, in a different way, not just legally, but civilly. The process is different. If a police officer, is involved in a shooting, there's an internal investigation, right? And
Right.
that investigation, there are lots of different rules and different precincts and all of that. So it's not like their best friend is investigating them, and I'm not saying that. But what I'm saying is that it's a different process. It's a different process than what your average citizen is getting.
Yeah. And to take it back to our example of the sheriff, like you imagine 20 people, 20 families per se, or maybe a couple communities of 20 that have decided to get together and pay one person to kind of take care of things. Once that person does something wrong, what happens to that person? I mean, does he get some special treatment? Would they be like, oh, that's the sheriff. It's okay if he shoots an innocent person. Of course not. It would be silly to treat the person you're paying to do what you could already do by a different standard than you would treat yourself. It just doesn't make any sense. Whatever limitations you would impose on yourself, you're naturally going to impose on your agent, right? The person acting on your behalf. To hold them to a lower standard doesn't make any sense. In fact, when you hire somebody who's supposed to be a professional at something, you feel like you should get if anything, you should get a higher standard. But at least we could say the moral standard is the same, and that any act they take should be judged by a similar standard of justice, which is what I mean when I say moral standard, as anybody else.
Because, like you said before, whether or not they're a police officer does not change what's right and what's wrong.
Right. It should have no bearing on justice. Their position in the community should have no bearing on justice. Otherwise, I mean, we talk about things like, there's concepts like the rule of law that are often talked about, and the value of the rule of law. But the rule of law at least implies that we're treated equally under the law, and that the law is applied to everyone fairly. The idea is that the law rules, not one particular person. But it seems like we have the rule of a law, and then we have the rule of another law if you were a government agent of some kind. And the police have one standard, and maybe others have different standards. But of course that chafes against people. Why should someone acting on your behalf to do things that you could do for yourself, that you were paying to do them, have extra protections when they wrong you? That seems so twisted. How did they become greater than the body that, than the people who give them who create their position per se, or who hired them? Anyway, so we've talked about a couple different practical things, or legal things and systemic things, the relationship between the prosecutor and the police, the qualified immunity, which is literally on the books in their Supreme Court cases you can look into about this, and the idea that on the books, the laws say that the police should be treated differently. The no-knock raids. Do you want to say anything more about no-knock raids? I'm so glad it's in the news, finally. And hopefully lots of people are looking into it. Because this no-knock raids are a situation where it's just a bad idea to be in this situation unless you absolutely have to be. Breaking into someone's house with guns drawn is not where you want to be as a police officer. It makes it much more likely than in other situations that person's going to respond with violence. And that may be because that person...
Interesting.
Oh, go ahead.
Well, it's interesting because we talk about de-escalation a lot when it comes to police interactions with people. I mean, I remember a few years ago when that was huge, right?
Mm-hmm.
And looking at what can we do to de-escalate these situations between the police and individuals. And no-knock raids, as you said, really are a systemic problem because they are inherently going to escalate situations that aren't necessarily don't necessarily have to be escalated.
Yeah.
And
That's a good way to think of it. I like that. That it takes a situation where you might approach someone and arrest them, bring them in, and then execute a search warrant in some way, and says, "Wait, what we should do is we should pull out our guns, and we should do it so fast that they may or may not know it's the police that are coming at them."
And that's where the innocent until proven guilty, I think, would become a factor, which is something that I strongly believe in. Because, to be honest, I mean, if you want to go with the most efficient way, and the least likely that the criminal will escape or that the police will be harmed, then the answer is simple. It's a smart bomb. You drop it right on the home and kill everyone inside. No, I'm serious.
No, you're absolutely right.
Extreme, but let's take it to the extreme.
But the theory makes sense. Yes, yeah, that's a good point. That if you want no chance of escape, and you want absolute surety you're going to get the person, you drone strike them. That's what you do with modern technology.
But that's not what should be happening in the United States, and neither is a no-knock raid, which is obviously not as extreme, but it's moving in that direction. Because it's saying that the criminals are so nefarious and so bad that we have to be ready to take them down at a moment's notice, that we need to break in the middle of the night so that they have no idea what's going on, and guns blazing, and see what happens.
Yeah.
It's asking for people to be hurt. And so that's the thing is, historically, what has that kind of tactic been used for? And the first thing that comes to mind for me would be hostage negotiation, right?
Yeah, the SWAT team busting in.
You've got bad guys who've got 20 kids in a school, and you send SWAT in to take those guys out, because at that point, we're not as concerned nearly about the criminal's life as we are about the children's lives, right?
Right.
That is a very different situation,
right,
than someone who is asleep in their bed at home, not doing anything to anyone. There is no urgency.
Right. That's a really good description of how it should be used, because in a hostage situation, you exhaust the other options first, rightfully so. Ideally, no violence is necessary at all. But if you need to, if there's no other, it almost becomes a necessity that you apply that kind of tactic, and that's when it becomes acceptable, because you're out of other good options. You're picking from bad options at that point. And you accept that.
And we can go back to the principle of what is the basis of their power, right? That if I'm outside a building and there are hostages being held inside, I have a right to go in and shoot the hostage takers to protect those who are about to be killed, right?
Right.
You know what I mean? There have even been instances where civilians have fired back, and they're lauded as heroes, right?
Right. Whether, and this is setting aside the concerns of whether this is practically speaking, a good idea or not, you absolutely have the authority to do that. And in some cases, depending on your training, you absolutely should. But go ahead.
But now switch to, here I am a civilian, and I suspect that my next door neighbor is committing a crime. You know what I mean? I suspect that he actually murdered someone. Like, we're talking serious crimes.
Mm-hmm.
And so I'm going to break into his home in the middle of the night and arrest him to see if it's true. There's no right for that, and there's no reason for that. You know what I mean?
Right.
All of a sudden, it makes no sense.
That's why, in practice, no-knock raids are most often used related to drugs. Because there's a second factor involved, right? You want to hit the house when they're not expecting you, because it turns out a really good way to get rid of drugs is to flush them down your toilet. And so if you go and knock on the door and they see you coming, they look out the window and they say, "Oh, it's the police. Quick, go flush the drugs down the toilet." And then the police come in there. They say, "We've got a search warrant," and they go and they search the house, right? No guns drawn, not a no-knock raid, just a normal execution of a search warrant. And they go in there and they look around, and surprise, surprise, they don't find the couple pounds of drugs that they were looking for. They've just been flushed down the toilet. But the question is, at that point, if you think, well, yes, we absolutely want to catch the people who are doing drugs, we'll put any question of drug laws aside at this point. Just assume that drug laws are just. Mm-hmm. Is catching that person with a small enough amount of drugs that flushing them down the toilet is practical, or burning them. I don't know how else you would get rid of them. The classic way is flushing them. If they have a small enough amount of drugs that they can get rid of it in a few minutes, is it worth risking their life and the lives of the police officers by going in there at gunpoint?
And that, I think, is an excellent point, that if we're talking, if we're talking that they're about to break in and what's going on inside is a full-blown meth lab operation.
Right.
We've got 8 guys working around the
Right.
clock in this chemistry lab in the basement.
This is a serious distributor. Right.
It's exactly, there's no way they're getting rid of all that evidence in 60 seconds.
No. This is the difference between a no-knock raid and a search warrant catching drug users is only going to affect a very small group. And it's a group that it's almost hard to care about, and that it's very hard to justify the risk of death for.
I agree completely. And that's, I think, where we come back to what is justified in what we could do. And that's, I think, how we have to look at it is that something that I would feel justified in doing, then maybe the police officer shouldn't be doing it if I wouldn't be justified. And I think that definitely applies to no-knock raids, that they maybe should be used, but very, very sparingly, which is not how they're used now.
No, it's gotten to the point. The ACLU did a study on it, and one of the things they found that was just bizarre was that it was becoming, in some places, it was becoming the normal way that police officers execute a search warrant. That they're like, and it seemed to be based on the idea that it was good practice. Good practice for the SWAT teams and things. So they would just be like, okay, we need to execute a search warrant. Why don't you guys get your gear and go? And I didn't look into the numbers enough to check the validity of it. But the ACLU generally is really good on crime statistics and things, regardless of what you think of their politics. And it was just surprising to me. Hopefully that isn't happening that much. It should never happen. Even in the cases that normally we would think those things are justified, it should happen much less.
No, that is incredibly upsetting.
That it would be done even in cases where they don't have any idea of drugs.
Where it's not necessary at all.
Right. Because if you're worried about someone getting away, what you do is you surround the house and you knock.
Yeah, it's easily remedied.
You don't.
And that's been policy for normal search warrants.
Right. You don't. You can keep them from getting away. Right. The only reason for a no-knock raid, or the most constantly used reason, is that they'll destroy key evidence inside. But if they have so little evidence in terms of drugs that you can destroy it, it's just so easy for both police officers and for ordinary people to be hurt in these situations. It's so easy. You've got your gun drawn. You go in expecting resistance, and it's a recipe for disaster. It should be applied as infrequently as absolutely possible. There are 2 other things I wanted to mention. One of the things is that police departments generally do not report things in a consistent manner, and we could do a lot to change general transparency in police reporting, make police reporting consistent across precincts, even consistent across states could be helpful, at least have the discrepancies noted so that we can compile national statistics when necessary. This is one of the things people talk about a lot: body cams. Body cams may or may not make a significant difference in terms of what actually happens. It at least gives us more information. You'd be surprised how many things like no-knock raids have gone on for years, and there have been a lot of disasters with them. But it was a problem of reporting, and we just didn't have good data in front of legislators.
And we never heard about it.
Yeah, it didn't make the news. It was written up as accidents. It was people see drugs and they see somebody died, and often write those things kind of up. It's a normal story.
And how many horrible things like George Floyd's murder have occurred in the past that people locally heard about, but that was never able to spread like it did, in today's world because of the technology.
Right.
Because we were able to physically see what happened.
Right. Right. At least these things need to make it into quantifiable data so that someone later can take all these anecdotes, put them together and see if there are trends and things. And that's happened in the things that we've been discussing tonight. There is good data on a lot of them now at this point, but certainly, at least in some areas, often, as I've been scanning different data on different criminal statistics, one of the things I find a lot is that you'll have data collected from a couple places that are reporting it well, some states or maybe large precincts, and then they'll have to extrapolate from that and assume how the rest of the nation is doing, right? They're saying, well, this is how it's going
from all
here.
Those who aren't reporting
right.
well, yeah.
Right. And so in that kind of thing, it's just it's just better to have more data. And certainly police body cams, I know there are times where they're turned off or whatever. But even that, even if we say that the police officer had a body camera, but it was turned off during this incident, that's a useful piece of information. And it does tell us something. It tells you something, right. And maybe all it tells you is that the body cams aren't working. Yeah. Yes, but once it becomes a pattern, right.
But as a pattern over a large scale.
Right, so that gives you information, and body cams are still fairly new. I know, I heard somebody say, yeah, they don't work because police officers just turn them off. And it's like, aren't there punishments if you turn them off? Like if maybe if there's a flaw with it, then fair enough, that's not your fault. But if you're turning it off randomly, leaving it off, shouldn't there be some? Anyway, those things can develop, and I think body cams will do and will make more and more of a difference as time goes on. Anything that gives us, like I said, anything that gives us more data, body cams, those things, more transparency, those are going to be helpful for making clearer decisions in the future. It's bizarre how little information you have. And go to your state legislature and ask for numbers on crimes in your state and different crimes, and you'd be surprised. The one other thing, and this is somewhat separate from the others, because a lot of what we've said up to this point is been about things that lead to police violence or to treating the police officers differently. And this one, in some ways, it's so big and it's so important, but it's not nearly as flashy as these other things. And it's one of those things that would benefit a great deal from better reporting. And it's civil asset forfeiture. And if you haven't heard of civil asset forfeiture, you're missing what may be the biggest way, the most common way that police powers are abused. And the way that civil asset forfeiture works, sometimes called civil judicial forfeiture, if you hear civil in it and you're familiar with law, you're probably going to get a misleading idea about how this works, because normally we think of criminal cases and civil cases, right? Where criminal cases, you've broken a criminal statute and you've harmed someone in some way. Whereas civil, it's a dispute of a different kind of dispute. But civil asset forfeiture is when the police, I've taken this directly from the Wikipedia page because I thought the description was funny. This is what how the Wikipedia page summarizes it. It says, it is a process in which law enforcement officers take assets from persons suspected of involvement with crime or illegal activity without necessarily charging the owners with wrongdoing. While civil procedure, as opposed to criminal procedure, generally involves a dispute between two private citizens, civil forfeiture involves a dispute between law enforcement and property.
Well, you lost me right there.
Civil asset forfeiture involves a dispute between law enforcement and property, such as a pile of cash or a house or a boat, such that the thing, the property, is suspected of being involved in a crime.
In other words, what you're saying is that take your classic, Law and Order scene. The police, they have their search warrant. They say, open up. It's the police. They break open the door. They head to the back room. They grab the pile of money and they say, you're under arrest, and stuff it in their bag. Is that about right? Is that what you're saying?
Very close. Very close. So if they arrest you and charge you, they may seize items as evidence. Civil asset forfeiture is where they do all of that and they seize the money and then they leave and they don't charge you or arrest you because they don't have the evidence against you, but they think this money might be criminal. which I'm trying not to laugh. But
because it sounds like what you're just describing is that the police can steal whatever they want whenever they want.
Well, then that money that they seized goes directly into funding the police department. Which, this is not funny. I should not be laughing. So here's how this is generally applied. The police pull over someone in their car, and they say they smell marijuana or whatever, and they tell the person, they go and they search this person's car. Well, this guy has $10,000 in cash on him, and he says, I was going to go buy a car. I'm on my way, or I just sold my house and I'm moving, or whatever it may be. And the police go, it's weird for someone to carry $10,000 in cash, so we're just going to take this. Now, they have no evidence that he's committed anything except perhaps the existence of what they are is vaguely suspicious, right? They have no case.
So my question would be, what is that man's recourse to get his money back?
Right. So this is the weirdest part, and this is what I don't know. Continuing on the Wikipedia page, to get back the seized property, owners must prove it was not involved in criminal activity. It being the property, and this is. Obviously, I didn't learn about this from the Wikipedia page, for the record. I've been following this for many years. But the Wikipedia page had put it so concisely and in such a funny way that it just cracked me up to no end. Because this is how it works. What happens is, so you go in, they seize this asset. They seize this item because they think that it's suspicious. They really don't even have to give a reason, because their issue is with the item, not necessarily with you. So then they take it and they leave, right? You're the person who owns this stack of money that was just taken, or this, whatever it may be. It's almost always liquid cash. You have a lot of liquid cash and you run into the police, it's very likely that if they become aware of it, they will seize it. And at that point, what you can do is you can go and try and show that that money was not being used for anything else. You take whatever evidence you have, your banknote, your witnesses, the person whose car you were going to buy, whatever you have to do, and you go and you negotiate with them, and you try and prove it, that you weren't going to use that for something bad, or that it wasn't involved in some drugs sales or something like that. And at that point, they will give you, depending on how it's settled, a portion of that money back.
Not all of it.
Not all of it.
Even if you prove that it wasn't used in anything illegal,
even if you prove that it wasn't,
back?
No, it's almost always a settlement. Almost always a settlement of some kind. And
so,
if this isn't the most obviously unjust thing you've ever heard, I don't know what to tell you. Like, if this isn't the most striking thing, and you think, and if you go, well, that's bizarre, that must almost never happen, you'd be wrong. This makes up a sizable portion of the funding of a lot of police departments, and that's why it's so pernicious. They get to use this money.
Because the incentives are set up for them to do it as often as possible.
Right. Even if you didn't let them use that money, you've got to think that the amount of times this happens would go way down. But beyond that, how is it just that they get to seize something from that somebody owns? I own this money, say. Why do they get to seize my money if they don't even have a crime to accuse me of? Like, the property doesn't commit crimes. It's such a strange thing. The logic behind it, and you can see why it was implemented, right? You get large amounts of money, and you know it's related to drugs or something like that, and so you seize that, and the idea initially. This is what's interesting about it, is that built into this practice is the plan for drug money to be used by the cops to take out more drugs. So that's how this idea is sold. Like, without this, there would be more drugs on the street, because the police officers take this drug money and they then use it on the police department to be more effective and to catch more drug users or more drug sales or whatever it is, more criminals.
Yeah, but I don't think most people would have a problem with the police using, seized funds from a convicted criminal. I really don't think people are going to have an issue with that. I'm not sure I have really an issue with that. For me, the issue is that our whole criminal justice system is built on the idea that we're innocent until proven guilty, right? That if I walk down the street not doing anything wrong, I have nothing to fear.
Yeah.
But what you're telling me is that if I'm doing something weird and I have assets that are worth seizing, which obviously comes down to money, that I shouldn't do that. It's weird because I immediately think of a coworker I have who hoards physical money.
Yeah.
I don't know why he does it. He's an interesting guy. But anyways, he hoards money because he doesn't like to have it in his bank. I mean, and it's his savings. You know what I mean? It's just his savings, and he just keeps it in his home. If the police ever found out about that money, they would definitely seize it because it would look suspicious.
It would look extremely suspicious.
And he would have no solid evidence besides witnesses of his family, which wouldn't hold up, and he probably wouldn't be able to get his money back.
No,
not for doing anything wrong. It's just his life savings.
Right. It's so odd. Like you said, it puts people in that position where they're guilty until proven innocent, and it is so hard to prove innocence. You're not daily keeping track of the things that would prove your innocence. You're not making notes and having ordinary people sign documents about what you're doing so that you can prove that you're innocent later.
Let alone trying to prove the innocence of your money.
Let alone trying to prove the innocence of your money. It's just again, it's one of those things where the incentives, like you said, the incentives are just so poorly aligned that it begs to be abused. It begs to be used by anybody who needs more money in their police department, which I bet if you would ask police officers, they probably feel like their police department could use more funding. Most public things do feel like they need more money.
Mm-hmm.
But it's a lot of people have called it policing for profit. You go, it's the one thing that police officers get to do where they make a buck. And like you said,
it's much worse than that. To me, it sounds much more reminiscent of a mafia shakedown.
Right.
Which I find deeply disturbing.
No, yeah, you get to the point where like you're looking for drugs or you're looking for large amounts of money. Both are good. This is not how this was supposed to be. This is not how this works. Like you said, if you can arrest someone, if you have evidence of a crime, charge them and then seize the stuff as potential evidence, right? And then that stuff sits in evidence. It's not touched. It's not spent. It's not negotiated. And they get it all back if they're innocent, right? It goes through an entirely different process. But if the civil asset forfeiture immediately puts it into a different pool, and it's just a bad way of doing. I don't know if it goes into the evidence locker. This is potential evidence of a potential crime that may or may not have been committed and which we're not charging anybody with. How do you...
Yeah, I mean, when you say it like that, it just sounds insane. It sounds insane that this actually happens and we let it happen.
Yeah, if you were to look it up today, you say civil asset forfeiture, what you would find is you would find a lot of political officials defending it. You find a lot of people being like, this is an essential tool of police officers. And they often talk about funding and things like that. It's silly. And it's another one of those things that like murders get recorded. They get recorded somewhere. Those things are going to make it into stats. Civil asset forfeiture, what are the stats on that? Some states, you can find it. Some states have realized that people, different groups, different think tanks, different bodies have been like, wait a second, this seems sketchy. And then they try and look at the data. They find that there is almost no good information on it. Police precincts aren't reporting it, or they're reporting it differently, or it may vary. And so then they go to the state legislature and they pass laws changing how police report it. And then they get good information, and then they freak out, and they're like, wait, this is how this works, and it's this common? And that's when you start to hear the stories about these kind of things. It's just clearly not the right way to do it. If you can convict someone, like you said, of selling drugs, and there's drug money there, fine. Where else is it going to go? Use it. But before a conviction, before even an accusation and a charge, before an arrest, just so
it's
clearly
disgusting.
Unjust. Anyway,
No, I'm sitting here having a hard time coming up with something productive to say because I just want to throw my hands up in the air.
Right. This is one of those things that the only reason the only thing that I can say that to explain its existence is lack of knowledge. Most people just don't know about it. That's the only way I can explain to myself how the world allows this to continue. And if more people knew about it, I think it would go away. It would go away very quickly. Anyway, the state level, what happens when I was following debates and cases on this, what happened is you get police officers who come in and talk about how critical it is to their work. And legislators have
all
a hard
the money
time.
that they're getting.
Yes. They don't say that, but that's what they're. No, most of the time we try very hard, Brad and I, to put the best of intentions on the situation, so that we're not assuming in any of these cases bad eggs. We're talking about things that are problems with the way the incentives align.
I stand by that I have seen a lot of people in a lot of different positions, both official and otherwise, and I have rarely met truly evil people.
Right.
In fact, I can't think of a single person that I've known at least decently well that I can say that person is just evil. That person is out to destroy and has complete disregard for other people.
Yeah.
And for the most part, people are good, but they're also trying to make it by. And that's why I mentioned incentives before, because when it comes down to it, and I've seen that in my own life, that I will often make not the best choices. And like I think about a lot of institutional things that point me certain directions and make it a lot easier to make certain choices. And I think that's something that we see a lot in terms of things like this. Like you said, for if I were a police officer and this is where most of our revenue is coming from,
or at least
how am I going to give that up?
A significant portion,
especially if I believe that the money we're getting was going to be used for nefarious purposes.
Right.
And if I believe that, why wouldn't I?
And in any particular circumstance, like I don't carry $10,000 in cash around. If I saw someone else carrying $10,000 in cash, right, I would be like, that's weird. And that's all they need. That's all they need under civil asset forfeiture. It's like you talk about like burdens, different levels of evidence required for different things in law. This one is just like a gut hunch, like a bad feeling is all it takes to.
And I know some people may listen to this and say, yeah, that's bad, but what's really bad here is the murders, right? Is where the police are killing people. And I agree that those are the worst. But the thing that I keep thinking about when you gave that car example is just most people are living paycheck to paycheck, or maybe one or two paychecks out. And so if someone, for whatever reason, does carry $10,000 in cash to go buy their car because they sold their last car, that $10,000 is not a luxury to them. That $10,000 is not whatever. That $10,000 is everything to them, because that is probably the majority of their saved assets. In this hypothetical scenario, and you take that $10,000 away, and now they don't have a car. Now they can't get to work, and they don't have the money to replace it because that money's gone.
Right, and now they need to have some kind of a legal battle to get it back.
Yeah, and where are they going to get the money for the legal battle?
Right.
When they're spending all the excess money they can scratch together to rent a car so they can make it to work.
Right. In a lot of these cases, like it's people who are new to the country or something, and they haven't set up a banking thing, or they're they're between banks, or strange circumstances that often align, as you suggest, with people who this is what they have. This is it. But yeah,
no,
anyway,
I can think of lots of examples of why people would do that.
And will a police officer believe the circumstances after he demands them from you?
Exactly.
After he's already suspicious.
And that really is the problem, is that if police officers don't have to prove before they can take, then that means the taking is unjust, is just wrong.
Mm-hmm.
And that's the long and short of it.
Yeah, so we've talked about a lot of different things. We began with the example of what it's like not having the police. So, the circumstances where it makes sense not to be paying someone to do any policing. And then as you get to that point, too, you talked about how it kind of grows into this point where it becomes really inconvenient for you to try and do that and to do other things. And so you pay someone basically as your agent to do the things you could already do. They don't have this new person, this police officer, this sheriff, whatever, this agent, however you would like to describe them, is acting on the behalf of the people who hired him to do things that really any individual could do, because you don't actually need a permission slip to act justly or to do good or to, help someone. Like these things are not, especially initially there where it's just probably one guy. It's very clear that one guy is not above the other people. He's not judged by a different standard. He's the only thing that distinguishes him from the others is that he is actively full-time engaged and being paid to defend them, defend their property, defend their rights, defend their families, etc. And then when you think of policing in those terms, it becomes very clear that police officers should not be above you. There should be no qualified immunity. They shouldn't be treated differently by a different standard. And then there are a couple practices that we proposed, legal changes. Beyond that, the no-knock raids that should be extremely limited in their circumstances and how they're applied. Very limited specifically to, it should be something pressing, and it should be something that you can't wait on, and you've exhausted your other options.
Something dire.
Something very...
Because it's life or death, which means it needs to be life or death to justify that.
Right. You've decided that you have to use violence to subdue this person, and that it's likely, because of the speed of it, that they are going to resist you. To justify that danger, it had better be something very pressing. Somebody's life had better be at stake, because otherwise, what justification do you have to put your own life, if you're the police officer, or the lives of these people at stake?
Yeah,
and
exactly.
Then, of course, the practical things, changing transparency, and then civil asset forfeiture, which just needs to go away. Those incentives are just too perverse. The way it works now is just begging to be abused.
Yeah, it's a no-brainer issue.
So, this is the first of many podcasts.
I sure hope so.
I sure hope so, too. We hope we found this engaging. Maybe think about things from a slightly different perspective and at least get into some of the particular issues, ones perhaps that you've never heard of. Some of these they're being talked about more now, but certainly very uncommon to hear people talk about them or who think that they were important before. But and it's so important, I just want to say one more thing, that it's so important that we try and make specific changes now. Because right now you have such bipartisan support. Everyone thinks that what happened to George Floyd was wrong. And now is the time to seriously consider the police. This is a good time where you've got the nation's attention. That attention could be used to actually stop more injustice from happening in a variety of ways. And there are systemic things that we can address. And so it's like that's exciting in some ways. It's a tragedy, but it can be turned to a good purpose if we will just do that. If we can concentrate on a few specific things and actually work on it.
Yeah, I agree. Channel that for something good, so that something good can come out.
Yeah, let there be a legacy to this injustice that isn't just division, and anger and frustration. Put that somewhere that will make a difference. And these are a few places, and perhaps a different way of thinking about policing altogether.
And that's part of why we wanted to do this, is because so often, I know for me, it really breaks my heart seeing the contention that occurs, because when it comes down to it, like I said, talking to people, we all fundamentally want the same things. And there are important issues that people disagree with, and I am not trying to diminish that in any way.
Right.
But we agree on more things than we disagree on. And I think when we break things down to a more fundamental level, and when we take a second look at it, we can really see that.
Right, and take a second look at it in a way that we avoid talking points, which are just substitutions for the discussion that could get more fully to the heart of it and could communicate more clearly and could actually, reach people and change minds and unite people. And that's hard. And it happens, those conversations are happening out there, but they're happening in pockets when I would be so much better off if they could happen across the spectrum. If you didn't just have a few people who could agree amongst themselves, but could have, at least a basis for discussion, if not agreement, some way to communicate.
Exactly.
And that's what we're going to try and bring to all of the issues that we look at, a way to rethinking that issue sometimes from the ground up, like we have here, where we're proposing a different kind of theoretical basis for police authority, a different way, a different perspective that may, if we think in those terms, help us interpret specific policies so that they're actually more just and actually have affect society for the better. And that's what we want to bring to a lot of other issues. So, do you want to introduce what we're going to talk about next week, next podcast?
Well, we kind of hinted at it.
I mentioned it in passing earlier. Yeah.
Yeah, and one issue that we didn't talk about intentionally, so we could talk about it later, is about the fact that police officers, when it comes down to it, their job is to enforce the laws. And we never talked about the fact that if the laws they're enforcing are inherently unjust, then it doesn't matter how good a police force we have, what they're doing is going to be morally unjust, right? So if the law says that all redheads must be killed, right, hypothetically, then as a redhead, I should be killed, right? And so the police, whether or not they follow all the regulations, exactly, they're still going to kill me and I'll still be dead. And that's a problem.
Right. We're not going to complain about whether or not they seized your assets before they killed you, or whether or not they, whether or not they're going to be tried, because they're not going to be tried. It's just the law.
And so police reform is essential, but it's only one of many important steps. And so the next thing that we really want to talk about is some of those laws and what the basis for laws should be and what a just law looks like versus an unjust law and how to tell the difference. And I am really excited about that, and I think it should be a lot of fun, at least for me.
Yeah, and getting into the specific ones, the drug laws are one of the hotly contested ones. We've addressed it a variety of ways throughout American history. There's a lot of perspectives and a lot of historical information on the subject, and there's a lot of obviously how it's affected people and what the state of it is now, and just there's lots of elements to it, and we just didn't think we could do it justice. Trying to consider the justness. A terrible way to phrase that. I see
what you did there. Beautiful, beautiful.
It was awful. Trying to consider the justness of laws while we're also trying to consider systematic issues that need to be addressed in how policing works and what the basic ideas of it are. It's just necessary to divide it into two issues. So anyway, all that's a long way of saying we're going to get into those laws, as Brad indicated, next time, and especially, we're going to focus on the drug laws, war on drugs. Obviously, it's a very complicated issue. Obviously, people already have strong opinions on it. But I promise you, the way we're going to discuss it is going to be probably different. I guess I can't promise I'm pretty darn sure the way we're going to approach it, the way we're going to describe it, and the way we're going to present it is going to be unlike anything you've heard. And with that, I suppose, thank you for listening.
See you next time.